Happy Wednesday, everyone, and welcome to today's Portage Global Water Futures webinar on 5 reasons why you should know the Canadian Surface Prediction Archive CaSPAr and the Global Water Futures data portal Cuizinart. My name is Jennifer Abel. I am the training coordinator with the Portage Network, and I'd like to begin today by acknowledging that the land which I'm speaking to you from is the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, the Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh. This is the 4th webinar in our co-presented series with Global Water Futures. The series aims to educate researchers and data professionals across Canada on research data management best practices and tools that are available to support them. These webinars will help participants navigate the evolving RDM landscape as funders, publishers, and the research community increasingly require good RDM practices. This particular webinar will focus on introducing the Canadian Surface Prediction Archive CaSPAr that provides an archive of Environment and Climate Change Canada's numerical weather predictions and allows the user to request custom subsets of the data. Sorry, I missed a period there. The custom subsetting reduces significantly the amount of data the users have to handle after downloading. The data all follow the same NetCDF format, which further eases the post-processing of the data. A similar database was set up in collaboration with the Global Water Futures project and is called Cuizinart. This disseminates data set used or produced in Global Water Futures and follows the same data format and custom requesting as CaSPAr. This webinar will introduce both systems and the data sets available to date. A live demonstration of data requesting and retrieving will be performed to illustrate some of the straightforward procedure to obtain data of interest. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. You have been muted automatically when you entered the room. This webinar is being recorded and the chat may be archived for those who are unable to attend. We encourage you to use the latest version of Zoom so that you have access to all of the features, including security updates. As I mentioned earlier, please use the chat feature if you're having technical difficulties or have additional resources that you'd like to share. As well, please use the Q&A option down at the bottom of your screen to ask questions of the presenter. Questions will be addressed at the end. You may also raise your hand if you want to ask a question. Questions may be asked in English or French, but I'm thinking will probably be answered in English.
Yes.
Good to confirm. We do have a code of conduct that we follow with the Canadian Association of Research Libraries, which you can find at the link on our screen, which will also be in the chat very shortly. Carl and the Portage Network are committed to providing a welcoming, safe, and harassment-free environment for its staff, membership committees, and working groups, as well as for participants, speakers, and organizers of Carl meetings and events. We do not tolerate harassment of any kind. Our presenter today is Juliane Mai, who's a research assistant professor, must be Wednesday, at the University of Waterloo. Her research is focused on parameter estimation, sensitivity, and uncertainty analysis of complex models. She applied these methods in different fields like systems biology, as well as hydrology and land surface modeling. She further made major contributions in the field of big data management through the development and hosting of the Canadian Surface Prediction Archive CaSPAr and the Cuizinart, which disseminates input and research data. And Julie, the virtual floor is now yours.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm trying to share my screen. Let's see that I picked the right screen. All right. Let's just go to the full screen. Okay, wonderful. Thanks a lot for the introduction. I think I'm already almost done with my presentation. Before we start here, I would like to acknowledge that we are participating today from the traditional territories of the First People across the country. Here in Kitchener-Waterloo, I acknowledge that I am on the Haldimand Tract, land that was promised to the Haudenosaunee of the Six Nations of the Grand River. The Haldimand Tract is within the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. I would encourage you to take a moment to recognize the traditional land where you are on. Before getting started with the actual presentation of the 5 reasons why you should know CaSPAr and the Cuizinart, we start right away with a poll that will help me to understand better what is the audience that I can target my presentation a little bit better towards. If you have already heard or used CaSPAr and the Cuizinart, just that I can focus a little bit more on the things you might be more interested in. So just take a few seconds to answer these two questions, and then we have a second poll actually.
The results are coming in fast and furious. We have an election coming up in BC where I am, so I'm, getting into the election spirit here.
Yeah. So.
Okay. All right. I think we have everybody here. Oh, a couple more.
Awesome. Thanks for participating. That's really interesting for me to see who actually logged in.
Okay. So I think we'll close the polling now. Thank you all for responding. And here are the results.
Oh, that's awesome. So it's basically, for CaSPAr, it's mostly like half-half. 40% have never heard or used it, and the other half has at least heard of it, and some have used it. And for the Cuizinart, it's a little less people who have actually heard of it, a little bit more people who have never heard of it. But that's good. That's good. Okay, cool.
Great.
The second poll would be about your background. I'm just interested in what you would potentially use these data for that are in the in CaSPAr. And in the Cuizinart, there's a lot of options. Like, I think you need to scroll down to see all the options here. Just pick the ones that mostly apply to you.
I think we're getting a pretty clear winner in this one, but we'll see what happens in the next 15 seconds or so. Okay, I think we'll end polling now, and we'll share the results.
Awesome. Yeah, that's what I guessed, kind of. Like, the first one is not very surprising. That's good. It's all about water. Okay, cool.
Great.
Nice. Yeah, and a few librarians. That's also very nice. And
excellent.
Half of the people, academic research. That's cool. Thanks so much. That gives me a really nice overview of who is gonna use probably these two databases. Okay, so let's get started. As Jennifer already introduced, this talk is going to be about the Canadian Surface Prediction Archive, CaSPAr. And in the last, let's say, 1/3 of the presentation, I'm going to talk about the Cuizinart, which you will see is pretty similar to CaSPAr. It's just hosting different data. I want to acknowledge that there's a lot of people who are involved in these two projects. I'm only the one presenting because I'm in both groups. And I'm hosting actually CaSPAr since a couple of years, and I came up with the Cuizinart framework. But there's, as I said, a lot of other people from McMaster University, Laval University, Compute Canada, of course, who's doing all the processing, and a few other institutions. So let's get started with CaSPAr, because that was also the first one that got developed. So the motivation behind CaSPAr is the following. I know, since I know from the second poll now that there's a lot of modelers around here. So we all have our different environmental models for doing different things. Flood forecasting, drought forecasting, it might be a climate model, it might be a model that is used for hydropower generation, whatever. So they are all very different in their setup. All the processes that are tried to be in, or that are in those models, are very different depending on the purpose. But they have all one thing in common. They all need input data. All these models, before you can run them, you need an input, like usually precipitation and temperature for most of the models, but some other might also need wind speed or other variables. So this is all not a problem if you run your model in the past, because you know how much precipitation was there at a certain day in the past. The problem arises if you want to run your model in forecast mode. So you, for example, want to run your hydropower operational model to predict what is going to end up in your reservoir you're trying to manage. So you need forecasted precipitation and temperature for that. So these are called numerical weather predictions usually, and they are issued by agencies like Environment and Climate Change Canada or the ECMWF in Europe. So the point is that they are like, these forecasts are issued at certain amounts of times and provided to modelers or the public even. What is provided by those agencies is usually all that they produced. And now, but you, for your model, for your special reservoir in the middle of Ontario you want to operate, you don't need this whole forecast. You only need certain variables. You're, for example, only interested in precipitation and temperature, but you don't need these other 50 variables that get forecasted. Or you only need certain forecast horizons because you're only interested in the first 24 hours and not in the 30 days this forecast is long. Or you might even be interested in getting archived forecasts, like the forecasts that were issued in 2019, for example, to see how your model would have worked using those forecasts to test models, to set up new data assimilation strategies and things like that. So for research purpose mostly. You might also be interested in getting different products to see which product might be the best forecast, because there's a wide range of different forecast products, better resolution, longer forecast horizons, and so on. So you might want to compare different ones. And you also might be interested in downloading, like there's a global forecast, for example. You're not interested in the globe. You only want to make a forecast for your one reservoir in Ontario. So you're actually only interested in a really small subset of this whole forecast. So this is what you want from such a database or from a forecast. So the current numerical weather prediction data dissemination system of Environment and Climate Change Canada is DataMart. DataMart is hosting the operational forecasts of the last few days. Like, it depends on the products, but it's like, let's say, the forecast of the last day up to like the last 10 days. They are hosted there. There's a whole team at Environment and Climate Change Canada, the operational team, making sure that these files arrive on this web page in time so that it's reliable. It's a 24/7 support to make it happen that those files arrive there. So then you would go there, you would download those files and would use them for your models. Several issues with DataMart. DataMart is, or things you should know about DataMart. DataMart is not an archive. As I said, it has 1 to 10 days of the last forecast, but not the forecast of 2019, for example, because it is the operational forecast. Second thing you should know, these data are distributed in GRIB2 format because GRIB2 is the format of the meteorological community. So these data are provided in GRIB2, but they are not the original data. The original data provided or derived by Environment and Climate Change Canada and are in a format that is not really accessible to everybody, so they get interpolated and transferred into GRIB2 format. What you can see here is actually the real screenshot of that web page of the DataMart. So you would be able to select individual files and download them. So you cannot spatially crop these files. So the files I show here are a global forecast. So it means you have to download the whole globe, which means there is a heavy post-processing required. First of all, to cut out the domain you're actually interested in, and then you would download like gigabytes of data, crop them, and the data you're actually interested in is only a few kilobytes. So you can just discard the rest. Plus, there's basically no hydrologic or land surface model, at least I know, that can read GRIP2 data. So you would always need to reformat your data into a data format your model can read. Because GRIP2 is meteorological, the meteorological format, but we are running surface models, and the surface community has NetCDF as a standard format. So you would need a converter. So this all led to the fact that we came up with CaSPAr, the archiving, the formatting, the accessibility of those data. So we came up with CaSPAr, which fulfills exactly those three tasks. First of all, we wanted to come up with an archive. So we are pulling in new forecasts every single night, about 300 gigabytes every day of new data coming in. We convert them into a standardized NetCDF format. So from the raw format, we don't take the GRIP2 files. We take the original data, convert them into NetCDF without any interpolation. I don't touch any of those actual forecasts. It's exactly the same as in the native format. It's FST, that's the internal format. Gets transferred into NetCDF. That's what we do every night. And then we provide a GIS-based web interface that you see. You would log into the web page, you would see that you would go to data portal, and then you can see all the different data we have and you can request them. So as I said, you as the user community, you would see the web page, which we call always the front end. So the front end basically tracks all the users. It knows your email address. You have to register for CaSPAr for only one sole reason, that we need your Globus ID. We use Globus as the tool for the data transfer. So you get a download link, a Globus download link. Globus is an open source tool which allows for parallel and secure data download, which is really important because a lot of you are requesting terabytes of data. So you don't want just use anything and then you are 99% done with the download and then your internet connection breaks and then you have to start from scratch. So Globus is making sure of all of that and provides all this functionality. It's a really slick tool to do that. So that's the front end, what you see. Where I am working most of the time is the back end. That's my responsibility. This is the location where all the data are sitting, like all these terabytes of all these forecasts are sitting. And once you request data on the front end would process that request and sends it to the backend and would say like, I have a request ABC, please process. Then the backend would process those data for you. Once the backend is done, it would notify the backend and say, I'm done with request ABC, please notify the user that is associated to it. So there's a strict separation of the front end, which knows all your credentials, your affiliation and everything. And the back end that has the actual data, they are completely separated from each other for security reasons and also to make it easier to, for example, switch out front ends or back ends in the end. So that's the only thing about the architecture. I'm now gonna come to the 5 reasons why you should actually know CaSPAr. So the first one, I mentioned it now quite often already, is the individual subsetting of the data. So you would go to the web page of CaSPAr. The URL is in the bottom here. So if you go to that web page, you arrive at exactly that page. And then you could go to the data portal, which is the link most to the right. And you would arrive at this web page where you can select where you have in the top, you can select all the different products we have. I will explain them in a few seconds. You would pick the one you're interested in, and then you would have to sign in because of your Globus ID to make sure that the data we process for you also arrive at one point at your place. You can pick the domain, so you can either draw a rectangle or a polygon by clicking on the map, or you even have a shapefile of your domain of interest, and you can upload that shapefile. That's what we did here. We uploaded the shapefile of the Hudson Bay, so you would actually only get data that are in that domain and nothing more. So it's not like you wouldn't get any data that are outside of that domain. It's all filled with no data values there. You would also be able to select the variables you're interested in. So you get the full list of all variables available, and you can just click the ones you need. You can pick the forecast horizon, so how long or which time points of the forecast you want to have. And then you can pick the issues. So a lot of those products get issued several times a day, so they get updated. So you get a new forecast every 4 or 6 hours, for example. So you would have to pick which of the issues you're actually interested in. So for example, only the midnight issue, or you're interested in all 6 issues of the day. And the last but not least is you have to pick the time period. So you pick the time period you want to have archived forecasts for. So for example, all the forecasts that got issued in July 2019. And then you hit the submit button and that's it. You receive an email like as a notification that we got your request. This email will just summarize what you requested, and it's a sign for you that it actually arrived. That's done by the front end, and then the front end basically notifies the back end, and it all starts processing whatever you have requested there. And in the end, when the back end is done, you get another email with the actual download link. And that might take a while depending on how large your request is. So the larger the request, of course, the longer the processing time is. So since I said on this slide that you can pick first all these different products, it makes it really, really easy to actually compare these different numerical weather prediction products now. So right now we have in CaSPAr, we have more or less 10 different products available. It's the most common numerical weather prediction products Environment and Climate Change Canada is issuing. So starting, we have 2 global products. It's GPS, which is the Global Ensemble Prediction System. And we have its deterministic pendant. So it's the Global Deterministic Prediction System as well. Different resolutions, different forecast horizons, but they are covering the whole globe. Then we have the regional products. It's the Regional Ensemble Prediction System, which is covering not the globe anymore, but only North America. And we have the deterministic one, which is also covering North America. Then we have CaSPAr, that's the Canadian Precipitation Analysis. It only contains precipitation. It's actually only an analysis, it's not a forecast. We have those at 2 different resolutions, 10 kilometer and 2.5 kilometer. The 2.5 kilometer, since it's so finely resolved, it's only covering Canada and parts of and the north of the US, which is augmented by CALDAS, the Canadian Land Data Assimilation System, which is exactly the same grid and domain as CaSPAr 2.5. but has everything but precipitation. So basically these 2 together would have temperature, precipitation, wind speed, and so on. These 2 together. Then we have the high resolution deterministic prediction system, regional deterministic prediction system, HRDPS. It's also at a 2.5 kilometer scale. This is a forecast. And then we have 2 reanalysis products where you can only see right now the first one, version 1 of the regional deterministic reanalysis system. It's a 15-kilometer resolution, and we only provide precipitation for now on the webpage, because there is a publication pending from Environment and Climate Change Canada. They are preparing the publication, and as soon as it's appearing in HESD, we are going to open up both of those products. We have also the version 2 of the reanalysis, which is at a better resolution, and it's also a longer time period. These data are available. I have those data. They are already on the back end. You just can't see them yet because I have to wait until I get the clearance from Environment and Climate Change Canada to open them up to the public. But they are coming very soon. So all these products together, as I said, like we are pulling in every night about 300 gigabyte of new data, which makes up about 11 terabyte per month. And we have so far more than 40 months of data archived. Some products have a longer record because I got some data from the internal archive from Environment and Climate Change Canada, but roughly all these archives start in July 2017. That's when I started hitting the button for downloading the data every night. So having all these products all together in one location now makes it pretty easy to compare them. And that's what we did in our publication where we introduced CaSPAr. It's this, the publication is under this URL, but what we did there, we basically downloaded, I requested all the data products that had precipitation. I downloaded all the products over a certain domain in Ontario. That's the Grand River watershed, for a certain reason, because in the Grand River watershed, there was a major flood event in June of 2017. That was just when we started the archive. So we wanted to investigate what the forecast actually, if the forecast actually forecasted high precipitation amounts, who would have helped to predict that flood event, basically. So you can see the different products that contain precipitation. They have different resolution. So for example, the global product here has a 50-kilometer resolution. So you get actually 7 different grid cells covering the whole domain. While if you look at HRDPS, which has a resolution of 2.5 kilometer, which has a way better resolution, you can actually see that the data we requested is basically more or less covering exactly the domain of the Grand River watershed. So of course, not only the resolution is different, but also the quality of those forecasts is obviously different. So you can, when you compare the precipitation you actually download from those forecasts, you can now come up with different analyses of analyzing those precipitation amounts. And that's what we did exactly in that publication. One thing I would like to mention is CaSPAr is only providing archive data. It's not an operational database. We are not providing the forecast of the last 7 days. Today, you can get the data that were forecasted last week, Wednesday. We have this gap, first of all, to ensure that we have all data complete, that everything is consistent. And I don't have that team like Environment and Climate Change Canada making sure that all these files arrive on time and then all are in the right format and everything. So we are not an operational database, it's purely an archive. If you want to have operational forecasts, you still have to go to DataMart and get your data there for the last 7 days. If you want something that is older than 7 days, you would get that from CaSPAr. What we have also shown in this publication is, of course, since you now can request exactly the data you only need, you can drastically reduce the amount of data you have to download and also post-process and handle on your end, right? So we did that exercise. We basically, for that request, where we requested only the precipitation over the Grand River watershed, we calculated how much data you would have to need to download from Datamart versus how much data you would receive from CaSPAr. And this is the saving of how much memory or how much the size of this request would differ between CaSPAr and Datamart. So the saving is more than 99% in most of the cases, and that's mostly due to the spatial cropping. So for example, the global one, you would only get 7 grid cells instead of like getting all the grid cells for the whole globe, right? But that holds for all the products basically. So that's the main difference between them. Fourth reason why CaSPAr is pretty helpful is that we are using a standardized file format. So no matter which product you're requesting from CaSPAr, it's always exactly the same format in NetCDF. It's a CF compliant NetCDF format. One thing we included and seems to be really important for most of the people using those data is that we actually include the projection information in those data sets, so they are properly geo-referenced and everything. We made sure that the NetCDF file can be viewed with most of the tools like ArcGIS, QGIS, NCView, Panoply, and tools like that. Which leads to the fifth reason. Since it's now a standardized format, which is used throughout the whole hydrologic and land surface community, you basically could use straight away those NetCDF files coming from CaSPAr and run your model with it. No post-processing required anymore. So I just list here a few models that basically are able to read in NetCDF data. And basically the only reason for post-processing might be that you need to convert units or that your model requires variables to be in separate files or things like that. So that would be the only post-processing that would be required, but that's then more on the model side. That's like a limitation from the model and not from the data set itself anymore. So that's pretty convenient. So you could run your model right away. So just a summary slide in between before we are coming to the Cuizinart. It's just like the 5 reasons I just highlighted right now was the individual subsetting in the first place via the web interface and also an API, which we will deploy soon. The easy comparison of all those products, because it really doesn't matter which product you download, the NetCDF files and the structure and variable names and dimension names are all the same on all the files. So that should make it much easier for you to handle those files. Obviously, the reduction of the data you have to download, standardized format, which leads then to the seamless utilization of the input data for the models that are usually used in our community. Things I haven't talked about is the fast data download. Globus is really good for that. It's doing all that in parallel and you don't even notice it. We have a GitHub library where we are sharing scripts that might be useful for you to process those data, to upload, to derive shapefiles you could upload to CaSPAr, which wouldn't lead to any problems. And last but not least is the modular and decoupled construction and architecture of the front end and the back end, which does not seem to be very important, but is the main point for my next slide when we are coming to the Cuizinart. So basically CaSPAr was operational for quite a while already when GWF started. And then GWF, as the world's largest university-led freshwater research program, we knew that we are going to use a lot of large data sets and that we are also going to produce a lot of large data sets. So the question was, or like the intent was, that those data sets that get produced and used by GWF should be on a portal like CaSPAr. But I wanted to have these things separate, to have CaSPAr only for numerical weather predictions produced by Environment Canada, to be able to accommodate every special feature Environment and Climate Change Canada would like to see in their portal. and having on the other side a second system, which is GWF only, to accommodate what they would need for their project. They might have other interests or other specifications. So we came up with the Cuizinart, and just the naming convention, or why we call it the Cuizinart, because you all might use a Cuizinart in the morning to make your smoothie in the morning. But here we are not talking about something that is slicing and dicing vegetables and fruits. We are talking about something that is slicing and dicing large gridded data sets. That's why it's called a Cuizinart. It's just shredding those large data sets into something you can digest, or your model can digest. So that's why Cuizinart, the name. But it's actually exactly the same as CaSPAr. So whatever I told you about CaSPAr holds also for the Cuizinart, because we had that front end and back end decoupled thing. That's CaSPAr, developed under Flatnet. And now we have GWF, which is called the Cuizinart, but it's like the CaSPAr, a CaSPAr-like portal, where the backend is exactly the same. Since I'm doing the backend, I basically only copied my backend codes, made a few minor changes that I needed for accommodating what GWF wanted, but it's actually the same backend. And we decided right away that we would switch the front end to something that is not proprietary anymore. We wanted to have something that is open source. So that's when Jimmy Lin and his army of co-op students joined the project and basically taking care of the front end. The lead is Martin Gau, who's here too, making sure that this front end accommodates everything and looks very similar to what we have on CaSPAr. So you as a user might see two different front ends, but actually the questions asked are exactly the same to make a request. The data sets that are on the Cuizinart are just slightly different. It's not environment and Canada, climate change Canada's numerical weather predictions anymore. It's data sets that are relevant for GWF. One example is a WRF control run over the Conus area, which is used by a lot of people as forcings in the project. So it's a really large data set. It's 6.4 terabyte itself. It's 4 kilometer resolved hourly data set covering 13 years and has 11 variables like precipitation, temperature, and so on. So this is sitting on our project drive, basically. And the worry in the beginning of GWF was like, well, we now have 10 researchers who want to use that data set. They will all download that data set. And in the end, we have to host 64 terabyte on our project drives. We don't want that, right? If everybody's downloading the whole data set over and over again. So we host that data set on the Cuizinart, have our front end, which looks slightly different because it's this open source version, but you also have to decide which product you want, which data range you're interested in, so which portion of the time period you want to have. You can select variables there. And then the same as CaSPAr, you can either draw a domain you're interested in. So this large domain shown here is wherever this control run is actually available. So you could request data for Hawaii, but you would just not get any data because it's not covering Hawaii. But you can request, for example, the Lake Erie watershed. What we did here, I uploaded a shapefile that is the Lake Erie watershed. And then in the end, you would click the process button here. You would also get an email with summarizing your request and so on. And your request would be sent to the backend where the whole processing is taken care of. And then at the end, when it's done, you get an email with a download link. That's exactly how it works. It's exactly like the CaSPAr experience. So in this specific example, I requested only 4 variables because my model only needed 4 variables of those 11. I was always also only interested in 5 years because my project was only for 5 years over Lake Erie. So we reduced the amount of data I actually had to download and use and process for like feeding my model with to 11 gigabyte instead of 6.4 terabyte. The processing time in this case was 64 minutes because everything, like the files are processed sequentially. We could parallelize that, but it was just never an issue so far. We do everything in serial. So that's basically the Cuizinart, but it's exactly the same as you. I think you can see that it's very similar to what CaSPAr is doing. It's really only the data sets that are ending up in Cuizinart are different. So I just wanted to highlight that we provided that framework of disseminating large and gridded data sets for the GWF project. That was like my task in this project, coming up with this framework and allowing for that portal, basically having front end and a back end and so on. What is now, I think, a community effort in GWF is to populate that database, right? With CaSPAr, I have an agreement with Environment and Climate Change Canada to pull in new data every day, but I know exactly which data are coming. GWF, it would be like one data set would be processed once, WRF would be derived once, and then it would be pulled into the database once, and it would never change from that point on. So it's a community effort to provide those data in the standardized NetCDF format I am tied to, basically. And this standard format is not a lot. It's basically only making sure that there is a description for all the variables, that I have units like metadata for all the variables. There needs to be added a 2D field of latitudes and longitudes to all the products, because the backend needs that. But it's somebody who is familiar with NetCDF. It's really minor things that we would request. It's nothing very special. And we need a unique name for your product, obviously, because you would need to be able to select it in the front end. There is a checklist available. Like, I wrote a document of all the specifics I need for these NetCDF files before I can put them in the database and everybody would be able to request them. It's in this PDF file, and I think these slides will be shared, so you will be able to see this link. It's just containing everything what needs to be done for those NetCDF files before we can put them into the database. We don't do that. It's on the users and to bring their data into the NetCDF format we can use. And then I make sure that all the requesting and the data requesting is working, like that's not crashing or that all the requests are getting out in time. So that's just my summary slide. Again, the 5 points why we were talking today about CaSPAr and the Cuizinart: subsetting, easy comparison, drastic reduction of the data you have to handle, standardized formats, and you can seamlessly utilize them in your model runs. This standardized file format is exactly the same. You won't be able to distinguish if it's a CaSPAr file or a Cuizinart file. They're exactly the same. It's my standard I came up with, so it's all the same on all platforms. And with that, I would like to thank you for your attention. I think we have a last poll to see how well I did in my presentation, asking you if, now that you heard a little bit more about Cuizinart and CaSPAr, how likely it would be that you would use either of those databases. So it's 2 questions. One is for CaSPAr. The first one is for CaSPAR, and the second one is for the Cuizinart. How likely it would be that you would use it now?
And again, our results are coming in robustly.
Nice, thank you. Yeah.
We'll give it another 10 seconds or so.
Yep.
Okay, I think we are ready to share.
Nice. That's really nice. So I did a pretty good job. So like that's only 1% of people would not use the Cuizinart. So I think that's a success.
I think so. And I think there's a good number of people who would recommend it to others as well.
Yes,
so.
yeah, that's awesome. Thanks a lot. That's really, I like that. So with that, I'm basically done with the presentation. I'm happy to answer questions. Like I saw that there were a few questions popping up in the chat. I would be happy to answer questions that are not answered yet.
Great, thank you so much, Julie. We've had a hand up in the participant area for a few minutes now. So Jiang, I'm going to allow you to talk and you can ask your question directly.
Awesome.
You should be able to unmute yourself now. Jiang, did you have a question? No? Maybe not. A reminder, if you do have any questions, then you can put them into the Q&A feature, which is down at the bottom of your screen, and we can ask them there as well.
Yeah.
So a couple of questions have been upvoted by a number of people in the Q&A area, so I think we'll start with those right now. So Nick Wrong has a question. Is there a page where I can find information about each of these products, metadata, variable, time horizon, resolution, etc.? Yes,
the CaSPAr has a GitHub. There's a GitHub for when you go on the webpage, when you go to caspar-data.ca, there is a link in the top that is called documentation. If you click on that, you arrive at our GitHub webpage. And there you find a wiki where all these are specified, and also in our publication, of course. They are explained. On the wiki page, you also get links to Environment and Climate Change Canada. So you have like documentation documents. You find the links to all of them there as well. I try to keep them updated as much as I can. So you find a lot of information on the GitHub webpage of CaSPAr. I think that's, yeah, that would be my go-to.
Okay, and a question that has come up from a couple of people. There seem to be differences in variable names between DataMart and CaSPAr, which has led people to have to juggle data from both sources and dig into their respective documentations in order to find the exact correspondence.
I'm using the, yeah, I'm using the original variable names that are in the FST files. And that's like the actual Environment and Climate Change Canada variable names. So TT, for example, is air temperature. There's also like in the front end, for CaSPAr at least, we are providing also like the metadata for that variable. So you would also see that it's the air temperature. And I'm making sure like the variable names in CaSPAr we are deriving, I need to make sure that they are unique. So the variable name not only contains like the variable name like TT for temperature itself, but also contains the level of that variable. So every variable, it might be that you have temperature at 2-meter height and 40-meter height. So there are 2 temperature variables in the archive. So the variable name for the one at 2-meter would be TT 2-meter, and then there would be another TT 40-meter variable name. So I'm trying, I don't come up with those variable names really myself. I'm basically only constructing like a unique identifier from what I get as information from ECCC in the original files. So I see that there is a mismatch because I don't know exactly which variable names they are using in DataMart, But if you have a question for one variable, you're more than welcome just to write an email either to the CaSPAr email address or to myself directly, because all these emails are ending up on my desk anyway. So you always have, like, I'm really happy to help to figure out, like, if you can't find it in any documentation, I would either ask somebody at ECCC to answer the question, or I would know myself.
Great, thanks so much. Another question that's been asked by a couple of people: are the underlying metadata, for example, dataset and paper citations for technical descriptions for the datasets in Cuizinart, available somewhere?
Not in the Cuizinart. We can probably upload that PDF file to the Cuizinart. I don't see any problem why we wouldn't provide that PDF. It's a PDF I had generated for GWF, for the data management team, to educate them a little bit, to show them what is a netCDF file actually, what would you look at to see if it's fulfilling the standard or not. It's a document like this, so there's no problem in sharing that document at all. I mean, I just put it like on this download link in the presentation. We can put that on there, and we can do that. There's no problem with that. I will write it down that we provided over there.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Good idea.
We often get good ideas from our audiences, so thank you all for them.
Awesome. Yeah.
Question: does Cuizinart only include published data, or is there also working data, so unpublished data? And are there any issues about managing data access?
So right now, everything that is on Cuizinart is open to the public. There is no, like, you need to register for Cuizinart as well, but only that we get your Globus ID. But even if you're not registered, you could go right away to the Cuizinart webpage now, and you would see all the products there. So we only host there yet data that are public. But of course, like, if there would be a huge need for having also unpublished data there, since we already have like this, that people have to log in basically to submit a request, we could always just like have like a firewall. Basically, if you log in, then you would just see a longer list of products available. There was just no need for that right now, and we didn't want to get into that. There was also never somebody coming and saying, I have my data, but they are not published yet. Could we have them on Cuizinart, but not visible to the public, but only to GWF people? That was just never a request yet, but it's technically definitely possible.
Thanks. Another, following up on that, is there an alternative to Globus? For some people, it's blocked by security in their corporate networks.
Right now, there's only the possibility of Globus. When we made that decision to use Globus, it seemed like we never had in mind that it could be blocked by somebody. And like, I have a lot of people actually from Agriculture Canada. They are blocked, for example. So they had like one person who downloaded everything at home. So there is no real alternative, and we never really got into that. It's also like Globus is supported by Compute Canada. That was the most, like the most important reason to choose it, because a lot of people, especially also in GWF, they are working on Graham or like on Compute Canada supercomputers, and you could actually download your data directly onto a Compute Canada system. So you would not actually download it to your private machine, but would download it to your Compute Canada memory or like storage, which is really convenient. So that's why, and when we started the whole project like 3-4 years ago, we asked Compute Canada, how would you do that? And they said like, well, we are supporting Globus, and that's how we got stuck to it. I don't have a lot of experience with that. If there is an alternative which would be accessible for everybody and also allows for secure download, I'm totally open for trying something else. I'm really open for that. If it's better, sure, I don't see any problem with that.
Great. Would it be possible, question here, would it be possible to get a link to the source code?
Of like the data, like the cropping?
I don't have any more details here. If the person would like to, maybe like to add into the question what they're looking for, we can get some more details there. As a reminder as well, you do have Julie's contact information here, and as she said, she would be very happy to answer questions after this webinar as well.
Yes, for sure. The source code for like there's different source codes, right? There is source codes, for example, to convert the native FST format into NetCDF, for example, like to convert like ECCC data into like the standard NetCDF file. And this code is shared with people from Environment and Climate Change Canada, for example, because they are the only ones who are actually using that native format. And then there's also like the source code that is underlying CaSPAr and the Cuizinart, but I'm very hesitant to share it because it is very tied to Graham, like this. There's like most of the core code is maybe 20 lines long. And the other 2,000 lines around it, just make sure that whenever Graham, whoever in the audience has worked on Graham, knows how evil it can be, to make sure that requests don't get lost, how to recover from a request that already did 80% of file processing and then Graham decided to shut down. It's only about recovering, handling errors, handling that the communication between back end and front end is not working anymore and things like that. So it's very specific, like most of the code is error handling. So I'm very hesitant to share the code because it's also like most of the people who would just like run a cropping of their NetCDF files wouldn't be interested in most of it.
Right.
And a large section is like submitting jobs to the cluster and like estimating file sizes and runtime and all these things that are very specific to the system this whole thing is running on. I don't know if that would be really helpful for most of the people.
Right. Thank you.
I want to pop in for a second here because the question has been noted as answered, which you did do a very good job of, Julie, but there was additional comments that I maybe could clarify what the user was looking for. They do say the backend code want the slicing and dicing code.
They want the slicing and dicing code, yeah. Well, it's based all on GDAL. Like it's probably, like as I said, it's probably like 20 lines. But it also only operates on that standardized NetCDF file. That's the whole reason why I enforce that standardized NetCDF file. And I don't see, like, these 20 lines work for that. And I don't see myself coming up with a very general slicing and dicing for whatever NetCDF file that might be out there. And I have like limited support for this, right? So I cannot, like, it's really difficult. Once you share code, you of course get questions. And I don't really see myself to support every single NetCDF file and problems people might have with slicing and dicing of their files. I can share the main code, like these 3 Python lines of like how to generate like a subset of a NetCDF file, but I don't think that it would be really helpful. It's really helpful once you have a standardized file format, which is the main problem in GWF, basically, to get data set or like to convince users to bring their data into this format.
Thanks very much, Julie.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Another question from the question and answer box. Is it possible to get the entire field from a model rather than just a subset? And what happens if the requested polygon extends beyond the model or data grid?
You don't have to worry about that. You could just like, I said that's still active, yeah. So you could, for example, you could just draw a rectangle around this whole, like this bluish whole area here. If you just draw a rectangle around it, you would get the whole thing. And it wouldn't crash or anything. It doesn't tell you that there are data points requested that don't fall into the domain. There is no error. Like, for example, you could request Hawaii. It would go through, you would get a lot of files that are empty. So also if you extend your rectangle beyond what is available, CaSPAr would, like the requesting would handle that. You would basically get only what is available. So there's no problem with that.
Great.
Yeah.
Is there a time frame of when the CaSPAr API will be available?
That's a very good, that's a very, very good question. So CaSPAr is right now working with ArcGIS, and having an API in ArcGIS is not extremely user-friendly because it is an API for every individual product. So you would have 10 different APIs. And I personally don't find that very attractive to the users. So I never really, the API actually is there. It exists. I just never made it really public because I find it so inconvenient, and it's changing all the time. And like, I find it so inconvenient to make that knowledge public that I never really announced it. For the Cuizinart, on the other hand, Martin and whatever React front end they have built, the API is available straight away. So for the Cuizinart, you actually have an API. And that's also why there is a lot of activity right now going on in CaSPAr development, is to replace the front end, basically, to make it a little bit more like looking more like the Cuizinart front end, and especially resolving the API issue. So we are like a couple of weeks away from probably switching the front end for CaSPAr, and with that right away, like you will as a user not notice anymore if you're on CaSPAr or Cuizinart, because everything would look exactly like you see on the screen right now. It's this kind of thing. The only thing that would change is the name. It wouldn't be GW of Cuizinart, it would be CaSPAr, and it would have different logos. That's the only difference between them. Everything else would be exactly the same. And with that comes, with that major update, the users will all get an email that CaSPAr will be down for 1-2 days. After that, it will look like this and comes with an API that is very user-friendly. Same API for all products and so on. So
great.
Give me 2 weeks. Bear with me. I know that there's a lot of users who are there since 2 years or something, and it was like, that was the first question we always got: where's the API? I don't want to click this thing all the time. And I'm the same, like I'm a user like this too. I don't want to click something 20 times. I want to script it and then submit something automatically. I know it's there, it's noted, it's coming very soon.
It's going to be a Halloween treat.
Yeah, it's going to be my birthday present.
Well, there you go.
For myself.
Excellent. Do you have a plan to provide real-time data in CaSPAr and Cuizinart?
No, because I like sleeping at night, at least a few hours. And as soon as you get operational and people rely on those data, there is hiccups. There are so many systems and so many different pieces that have to work together. When one piece isn't working anymore, the whole chain crashes. And right now I have 7 days to recover. Like I have 7 days to get data that are missing, that I didn't get because the internet connection wasn't working, or this and that. I have 7 days for that. And I need people, I'm relying on other people too. Graham is shut down sometimes. They have maintenance windows of weeks. Like it might be down for a week. Like what would happen? Like nobody could get forecasts anymore because Graham is down. It's not my fault, but it's just down. So that was a clear decision. We don't want to interfere with data mart. Data mart has its reason to be there and it's totally fine. And I don't want to mess with that. They have a whole army of people behind that, making sure that these files arrive there on time. Everybody's relying on that. And I'm alone. So I need 7 days. So if I get a whole army of people, but that's probably not gonna happen. What might happen in future and what's like the very long-term goal is that Environment and Climate Change Canada is hosting CaSPAr themselves. So it would be part of their operational system. So it would be all on their plate. So nothing would be processed on Graham anymore, but everything would sit on Environment and Climate Change Canada's systems, which are operational systems because they are doing those forecasts on an operational basis. It's a completely different story then. And then of course, Environment and Climate Change Canada can decide if they want to do it operational or not, like the recent forecast in there or not. Yeah, but I can't do that.
Right. So a question then from the chat that kind of follows up on that. Would the slicing and dicing then be added to data mart as well in that instance? If ECCC,
I don't know. I can't speak for ECCC, but if they would host CaSPAr, they would host it as it is right now. With the request, like CaSPAr is the archive, right? The AR in CaSPAr is the archive. So this archiving function will always be able to have the slicing and dicing. I'm pretty sure when it comes to the operational forecasts, they cannot produce user-specific requests on the fly for an operational real-time forecast. That it's just not, because you have to process those data. What data mart has, they have the flat files. It's just like the same file for everybody. They don't have to do anything. They just put this file there and then everybody can use it. Right? If you have users that are relying on operational forecasts, cropped their domain and variable, like specific for them, I can't speak for ECC, but I know how it's working at the ECMWF. They are sending out user-specific forecasts to whatever 5 million people. There is a complete different infrastructure behind it. So I'm guessing that for the real-time forecast, nobody would do like cropping or allow for cropping actually. But for the archiving, it's something different because you get the results whenever you get the results, right?
Yeah, we do have a comment in the chat that says, from Sandrine, that says for real data from ECCC, the API MSC Geomet enables on-demand raw data clipping. So,
yeah.
I'm mindful that we are at 10 minutes past the hour. We do have a couple of questions left, if you're okay with still answering those.
I'm good.
Great. So the second to last one is from Clayton. One issue I've had with using CaSPAr from the web portal is getting information on the model used to predict the data. It would be nice if there was a link from the front end to the ECCC documentation on the model. And it says, from a first look at Cuizinart, it seems to have the same issue.
Good point. I will write that down. There's no problem with that. Like it seems like this user already used CaSPAr. Like when you select the product, you always get in the top right corner, you get like a description what this product actually is. Like not only the abbreviation, but also spelled out what this abbreviation actually means. I can just add a link there, linking directly to the document at the ECC site. There's no problem with that. If I have that documentation, for some products, Cal does, I think. I don't have a documentation, so I can't add a link. I can add it for whatever I have. And with the Cuizinart, it's actually, the Cuizinart is coupled to a metadata catalog. It's called the WAMEDEX, the Waterloo Metadata Index, also developed by Jimmy Lin's group. So when you select a product, you would actually, if the metadata for this product exists, once you select it, here, I think the screenshot you still see is an old one. There's a newer version where we coupled it with the metadata index to get a small link below the product, which shows up, and then you can click on it and it will forward you to the WAMEDEX. And there you get all the details. Who processed those data? What is the publication? What is the DOI? What is whatever, Balika, basically, or the data management team makes sure that we have metadata for all the products that are on the Cuizinart. So that should be there actually for the Cuizinart.
Great. And what will be our last question is, what's the data range and spatial resolution of the reanalysis soon to be released? Thank you.
It's roughly a 10-kilometer resolution over whole North America, including Mexico. And it's an hourly data set. The first half, I got already the first half of the reanalysis. It's covering January 2000 to December 2017. So it's 18 years. And there is currently processing at ECCC. They are processing the second half of that data set, which will then, I think, cover 1980 to 1999. So like the remaining 20 years, I think that's like about, it's gonna be like a 38-year data set, plus minus. All hourly, we have, I don't know, above 10 variables in there, let's say it like that. It might be 12, 14 something. Precipitation, temperature, wind speed, humidity, whatever you can, whatever variable most of the people need to set up any kind of land surface model and hydrologic model. 10
Great.
kilometers, yeah.
Great. Well, that brings us to the end of our questions. So I will say thank you so much to Julie for this presentation. It was a great overview of the two different resources, which I hope was useful for all of you, and a great addition to our series. And a reminder that next week we will be having our presentation on long-term preservation called Look Before You Leap, which is being presented by Grant Hurley and Shahira Khair. Hope to see you all there, and hope that you all have a very good rest of your Wednesday.
Thanks everybody for joining, and thanks a lot for all your questions. I really appreciate that. It helps to improve. Thank you so much. And thanks for the invitation for that presentation.
Thank you, Julie.
All right.